Okay, I skipped forward just a bit after doing some further tweaking where I used the split rings tool to quickly add edge loops where I felt I needed some reinforcement around edges, as well as just adding extra geometry. In this case, here in the eyelet area, I wanted to use the free transform tool. So what I did is I went to the select tool, just as I did in the previous videos. With auto mode selected, you can just choose the type that you want. I need to reduce my brush size so I can pick this polygon, because if it's larger, it makes it hard in auto mode to choose that. So you can use your bracket keys. So once again, when you're in auto mode, the first option you pick is what 3D Coat will put you in. So if I click on an edge, it's going to put me in edges mode. So anyway, I just click the first object and then I can just continue brush selecting. And I don't have to hold a shift key, I can just continue additively picking. If I want to remove a selection, I just hold the control key. Okay, so yeah, this is pretty much all I did. And just as I did in previous videos, use the free transform tool just to basically extrude inward. I'll do that and hit the escape key to get out of the transform tool. And sometimes I like to use the move vertices tool in vertice mode. Just kind of move around some vertices where I feel I may have an extra overlapping vertice. So in this case, I don't. But sometimes you'll find if you're in symmetry mode, you may have extra overlapping vertices here in the very center where you have a symmetry plane. Oops, Z-axis. You'll notice you have a mirror snapping option here. If this is too low, what's going to happen is you're eventually going to end up with a model with a lot of overlapping vertices, or just trouble here in the very center where that symmetry plane was. So make sure to give yourself about 30 to 40%. That way it welds vertices that are within a certain proximity of each other. So just wanted to throw that out there. I'll turn my symmetry plane back off. Okay, so yeah, I just extruded all these eyelets here, and I can go in and make them deeper if I want. I probably will do that here because I want to give them just a little bit more geometry. So I'll go back to the select tool, and again I'll just hover over the element that I want to start working with. This is a little bit different than the auto mode in move vertices. You'll notice with move vertices, this really should be move elements, because there are multiple sub-elements such as vertices, edges, faces, edge loops, and edge rings. But in auto mode, you can move vertice and then hover over an edge and move the edge, then hover over a polygon, move the polygon. You can't really do that when you're in select mode. Select mode, it doesn't switch you to one element or the other after having made a certain selection. So it's a little bit different than move vertices. What I mean by that is, when you're in auto mode, if I click on an edge, it's going to switch me to edges mode. Okay, so once I have that selection made, if I hover over a vertice, you see it's not going to switch me back to vertice mode or anything. So I'm kind of stuck in that mode unless I come up here and change it. And as I mentioned previously, if you have hotkeys assigned to these, you can quickly switch back and forth, just as you would in your 3D application. With that said, I'll hit escape to drop that. So let me just go ahead and in auto mode, let me just click on the first element. It automatically switches me to polygon mode, so I can just go ahead and brush, select those areas, free extrude, just scale it inward and go downward just a bit. Hit escape. You may notice that once you drop the tool, 3D Coat will switch you back to auto mode. Once again, I'll use my hotkey combination for the free extrude tool and then escape. Same thing, I'm in auto mode. Just go ahead and start selecting, hit my hotkey for that. And in the tool options panel, I'm going to choose to main axis, which is the same as local axis in many 3D applications. Scale it in, escape. As I continue working on these eyelets, I'm going to speed up the playback quite a bit. I'm now going to go along and just tweak the position of the vertices on each one. Let's now adjust the opacity of the Retopo mesh so we can see the underlying object a bit better. And sometimes you have to be a little bit careful when you're tweaking, because as you move a vertex close to another one, 3D Coat may want to weld it, and you'll see that little red dot indicating that it's going to. So I had to undo once or twice. Now switch to the brush tool, and with the shift key held down, I'm just smoothing the inner part of the eyelet. And so when you use the brush tool like this, you can smooth on the fly, but you can also just reduce the smoothing level by right-click and dragging up and down, and you can simply use this to locally snap in certain areas like these eyelets. When you use the free extrude or the transform tool, it may not snap all the vertices once you drop the tool, so that's why I'm going through and just tweaking the eyelets so that I make sure that they are properly snapped. Right, so I think we are finished with the top half. I decided to leave the bottom half open because it's going to be covered by the sole portion of this cleat, which we're fixing to retopologize next. As I mentioned in the first video, I wanted to show a quick technique that you might try in order to prevent some of the snapping issues that can occur when you have overlapping components on your model. What I want to do is I'm wanting to create a proxy essentially that has all these layers merged as one, and that will prevent these errors where it snaps, beneath another object. I can just choose this new blank layer that I have. I can name it Proxy. With that selected, right click and choose Merge Visible. Or you could go to the parent layer here and choose Merge Subtree, whichever you choose. So I can now go ahead and delete this blank layer that I created just for demonstration purposes. And I'll hide the parent layer and then return to unhide the one that I merged previously. So I now have one solid object to utilize. Also right-clicked and chose Fill Voids. If this is in surface mode, I don't have to worry about that. But if it's in voxel mode, sometimes you may have little air pockets in between these different objects that were created that can cause some snapping and baking errors. Okay, so let me hide that. We'll come back over to the Retopo room. I'm going to open the shoe sub-elements here. And I think I may do the same thing here, actually. So I'm going to go back to the voxel room here. So yeah, I like creating just a blank layer. Let's go back to this newly created layer, and I'll call it Sole underscore Proxy. Now just right click and choose Merge Visible. Okay, and let me hide that first layer. I typically choose maybe this Cook Torrent shader. It's not quite as flat, it's not quite as bright, and if you need to do any vertex painting, it represents the color very, very well. Whereas if you choose something with a lot of color, whatever you paint, you're not going to get very bright whites or very bright colors. It's going to use this tint of the shader along with it. So that's something to bear in mind. All right, so let's go ahead and get started here. What I'm going to do here is I'm going to try and make this one contiguous mesh rather than creating one mesh for the flat surface of the sole and then smaller individual meshes for the teeth. That might be the quickest way to go about it, but just to make this clean, I'll try to make it all one contiguous mesh. Probably the best thing is to go ahead and use a function of the strokes tool, which allows you to create very quick meshes on objects that are kind of primitive shaped, like a cylinder shaped object, a cone, a rectangle or square, something like that. You can basically just create a few loops in one cross section, and 3D Coat will create an entire mesh encompassed within those loops. So let me go ahead and get started here. To help prevent any perspective distortion, I like to go to orthographic view when I'm using this tool. Start outside the object on one end, click and drag to the other end and outside the object as well. Because if you start inside the object, 3D Coat is going to assume you want to make just a single stroke here. But if you start outside and end outside, it will try to create a loop. And the really nice part about this is if the inside of this was hollow, for example, like a barrel of a gun, when you make the selection, 3D Coat is going to create an identical loop on the inside as well. With that done, let's create one here, and then one in the middle, and try to get one as close to the flat part of the sole. I can just drag through all these loops here. It creates a nice line. And now all I have to do is hit the Enter key. And you see it created an entire mesh for me. So this is almost an Auto-Retopo tool in and of itself. So let me undo that. The more segments I have, the more connecting I have to do when trying to piece this all together. So I probably want to keep it as low as possible. So let's go with 8. Alright, so let's hit the Enter key, and so that's good. We want to keep that number pretty uniform with all of these, and I'll create my cross section right here at the same location so it's easier to connect these up later on. So I'll do the same thing here. Try to get this nice and level. Outside, outside. And I just want to make sure that I put enough geometry right here where there's an edge or a crease. Once more, just drag a straight line, and 3D Coat smooths that line out for me. Let's go ahead and bring this video to a close, and we will pick up in the next one. So stay tuned, and thank you for watching.